in mid of May is when DeepMind actually released this paper called AlphaEvolve, where they described the evolutionary coding system which combines LLMs with evolutionary algorithms, right? And so if you look at the paper, I mean, the basic architecture, when I looked at it 3 months ago, I saw was like not very difficult to see, right? So you had like just 3 or 4 different components. You have a way to sample new programs. You have a way to combine them, evaluate, and then maintain a database of programs. So, as with many of the recent discoveries or whatever releases that DeepMind has done, this was not open source. It was very brief. The paper was also not a research paper, so more like a white paper, right? And what I did then was I spent the next 3 or 4 weeks trying to see if we could replicate this, right? And I think it took me around 2 weeks for the initial implementation, and then another couple of weeks to replicate some of the results from the paper. So all of the work that you see here today, including the OpenEvolve repository, is just 4 to 6 months old, right? And once we open sourced it, we saw a lot of adoption. So it's being used in many research groups. It's being used by many different companies. I've actually decided to spend my full time working on this project going forward, actually. Right? So at the surface, so we have many different coding assistants, right? So we use, Claude Code, Gemini, Codex, etc. But OpenEvolve is slightly different, is that we are not trying to generate new code. We are trying to change existing code, right? So the very basic loop looks like a very simple evolutionary algorithm. So while something is not optimal, we just keep mutating the code. And how do we decide whether it's optimal or not? We have some way to evaluate on some metrics, right? So this is actually the architecture from OpenEvolve, and if you would go back quickly to see how this image from the paper looks like, you'll notice that all the 4 components are actually present, right? So we have a program database which stores the programs and metrics as they evolve. We create an LLM ensemble which we use to generate new instances of programs. And then we have an evaluator pool where we can test programs and assign scores. And then we can control all of that using a controller, right? So I think many of you, I don't know how many of you are actually familiar with the evolutionary algorithms or genetic programming and so on. Okay, so good, because I wasn't, right? So, and I had to, when I was trying to figure out what, because in the paper they mentioned some very specific things, like, hey, we implement an island model for GA, we use MAP elites, and we use this. So what exactly are all of these things, right? So I actually found this, so I created this very quick resource, which I found quite useful to understand. And looking at the number of people who raised hands, I think it will be useful for you too. So a basic genetic algorithm looks something like this, right? So you look here, we have a target string, and our vocabulary here is just capital alphabet and then spaces, and we want to figure out this target string, right? And the only operators we are allowed to do are the generative operators like selection, crossover, mutation, and so on, right? So what happens here is you can see there's a population of individuals. So individuals here are again strings, and initially they're all random. So we just start with some random 50 strings. And what we do is at every instance or every iteration, we just apply these operators. So what is selection? So if I just pause very quickly here. So selection is just we take 2 individuals from the population. We parent 1 and parent 2. And then we try to combine them, right? And we combine them similar to how genes combine. So there is some crossover point. So from before the crossover point, you just keep one parent, and after that you keep the other parent, and you get a new child, right? And that's the resulting child, and so on. At every instance, you need a way to actually test fitness with what you're trying to achieve. So in this particular case, we are trying to evolve to this target string. And the fitness is very simple because we can just check whether each individual character, whether it satisfies it or not, right? And then we compute a fitness score. So in this case, you can see that 4 out of 6 characters are satisfied. So this fitness score is 66.7, right? So in the population, there will be individuals which will have different scores, but there will be some which will have slightly better scores and so on. There is another operator which is this mutation. So just randomly at some particular point in the string, you can mutate it, right? So if you see, I've been running for a few generations, but it's still stuck here. So let's see what happens if we increase the mutation rate, right? So I just changed it to 0.2, which means 20% of there's 20% chance in every iteration that we will mutate a particular character. right? Usually takes around 400, 500 odd generations to achieve the target result. But let's see if I'll just continue, let it run for a bit. But eventually you can imagine that just doing this and just following this very simple evolutionary operators, you can actually figure out what the target string was, right? So that's the basic structure of a GA. I'm gonna stop here, and I'm just gonna very quickly switch to GP. So you can do this with strings, but obviously you could do this with programs as well. So because you could treat, so this is an example just showing like the target function is actually a quadratic, and maybe I start with something which is slightly more. And this is our program. And then we can define similar operators, right? So to selection, mutation, we can define it on the AST. And then we can have a fitness function. So because we know the curve for what it needs to look like, and you can see what the target is. And you can just evolve, and you can see that you'll try to add a constant, remove a constant, subtract. So because programming language will also have a well-defined structure. I mean, it will be a tree or it will be a grammar. But based on that grammar, you can actually mutate things, and you can add and remove, and then you can finally say that it found, maybe it didn't find the exact target function, which was a quadratic equation, but it did find something that fits it very well, right? So you can apply the same thing to programs, and that's how typically we used to do genetic programming. At this point, I'll just introduce one thing, which is this islands model, so it's the same example with the string evolve, but instead of maintaining just one population, we actually maintain 4 populations, and they are like islands. Why are they islands? So in islands, what happens is the mutation and the crossover and the selection happens within an island. So it's useful to maintain diversity. So an individual from one island is not going to create an offspring with another individual from another island. So we maintain diversity. We allow migrations between islands. So after a certain number of generations, we allow individuals to go from one island to another. So all of these actually come from biology. That's why you see these kind of populations and so on, and species. So how species evolve in one single island when they cannot interact with others and so on. So we can lift those things, and that can actually help. So I think increase the diversity, and what you'll see as a result is that you can actually converge much more quickly. Right, so compared to the case where you had only a single population. So in this case, I think within, you can see, within a few generations, we are already at 83%. And then I think if I let it run for a bit, it'll be able to find the target string very quickly, right? So this just is a way to systematically manage the population in such a way that you preserve diversity. So the issue with the previous case, so they already reached the target, right? And then we reached it in around, what is the generations? 130 generations, right? And earlier when I was running, it went through 400 odd generations and it was not able to find it, right? So this helps us achieve convergence much more quickly because we have a way of maintaining diversity across pools of population. Okay, so that's the final thing. With that, I can give you the insight behind OpenEvolve or AlphaEvolve, or how it actually looks like, right? So we apply this, but this traditional operators of selection, mutation and crossover, imagine we just use an LLM instead of doing the, moving one part of the AST in different place, adding constant and so on. So for example, this is the Python program that you want to evolve. It's a very simple program. It's just multiplying every element of a list by with 2. And you want to evolve just this function. You want to optimize this function, right? So what you can do is, or how AlphaEvolve's pipeline works is, you create a prompt that you can use for a LLM. So it says that, okay, you're an expert so-and-so. This is the code that you're trying to evolve. This is, make sure that you only modify the diffs, right? And so this part is just similar to how you would chat with an LLM. So you can just take this part of the code and you can paste it into, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, and you can ask it to optimize, right? And it will return something. So in this case, it returned this particular thing. I think it just added a lambda, right? And then what you can do is you can treat this as a child program. So you had an original parent, you sampled a prompt, you applied it, you got a child, and then you can evaluate in a traditional sense of how you do with the EA. So in this case, I just put like performance, readability, or whatever score. But evaluation will usually involve running the program and collecting some metrics, right? And once you have this, you can then decide how fit it is across some particular metrics. In this case, you could think of maybe if you're improving performance, you could say, okay, how quickly does it run, right? And then you can add it to your database. And you can do this again and again across different iterations. This and this would implement evolutionary algorithm on top of LLMs. So the operations of crossover or mutation, instead of that, what you have is actually prompts. And those prompts actually are sent to LLMs, which generate the next version of the program. Okay? If it doesn't make sense, don't worry, because I'll show you our running example, and then that would make a lot of sense. Any questions at this point? Otherwise, I'll now jump in a demo so that you can see how it works, and then we can come back to this particular example. No? Okay, so if you have cloned it, you would be in a, hopefully you can see, increase the term. So you'll be in a folder like this, right? And once you install everything, you can go to one of the examples. So the example we'll take is this function minimization. And if I go here, so this is where we are. Sorry, this is the other project. This is where we are. Go to this example. And you can take a look at function minimization, right? So we want to see if we can minimize this complex non-convex function. And just to give you a sense of like this function, it's not that, I just pasted it in Wolfram Alpha just to show you like it doesn't have a well-defined global minima. So we'll say there's no global minima, but you can see the contour and you can see like, okay, somewhere here between 0.5, 0.6 or, minus 1.6, there is a, contour or there is a valley, and that's probably where there is a minima, right? So with this insight, this is kind of how we started. So this is the function. So in OpenEvolve, to start, you'll need to have some initial program. So you can generate it outside by like using an LLM, but otherwise, like I mentioned in the very beginning, that it doesn't generate the program. You have an existing program. So for this particular case, we can start with like a random search. So we just bound ourselves because we see that it's 3 and 3. It's probably not going to go beyond that, this function. So we bound -1, -5 to +5. We put some iterations, and we just randomly just put points there and then see whether it reaches a minima or not, right? So we just take x and y in these bounds, and then we just try a lot of these things uniformly, and then we'll see whether it is satisfied, whether it is minimum or not. And the function is here, the evaluate function is exactly that, which we are trying to minimize. So it will just generate the value, and then you can see whether what you got is best or not, right? So this is random. So we could start with like just a random algorithm. You also need an evaluator. So the evaluator is how you'll generate the metrics. In this particular case, we have some insight, like I think around -1.7 or this, maybe there is like a global minima. So I could generate a metric which says how close I am to this, or how in the neighborhood of this value am I, right? So depending on the program that you're trying to optimize, you may come up with different metrics. So if you're trying to optimize something where you're looking for times, you might just run it a few times and then see what happens, right? So in this particular case, because it's a function, I just come up with some ways to define this, how close to the value I am, how distance it is. And then I combine all of it into a single score, which is what OpenEvolve uses for fitness, which is called the combined score, right? So these are the only two things. And finally, you have some config which controls the overall evolutionary trajectory, right? So for this particular talk, I made some edits so that we get some results very quickly. But basically, you can control the number of iterations, after how many iterations you want to checkpoint the results. And you can define the ensemble of models. So you can have one model, or you could choose a number of models. So here we use this primary secondary, which is from the AlphaEvolve paper. So what happens 80% of the times when I call an LLM, it will choose this, and 20% of the time it will choose this, right? Now why? This particular setup or this kind of ensemble is mostly just for speed, because the latency of using Flash or Pro or some bigger model is higher, and Flashlight is actually much faster. So we just choose this just to balance out so that our evolution is fast. There are other ways to ensemble, like you might think I take 2 big models or 4 different models and then I try to combine the results. And I'll talk about that towards the end of it. But I haven't found it I haven't actually made it work. So, but this particular thing is from the paper, which works quite well to speed up the evolution, right? Now, all the time I spent telling you about the islands and populations and all that, it was just because of this. So we implement the exact same islands algorithm. Each individual in the island is the program. So you can decide how many number of islands you want to maintain. You can decide what is the population size of the island. There's this, so you can also do parallel evaluations. So instead of doing one at a time, you can start with n, and it works. The way it works is we would actually assign each worker to each island so that it samples only from that island, right? And there are some other things around code length and token size and temperature, which are common in LLM. So we just choose something just to make it work, right? So once you have all of this, you can just run OpenEvolve run with initial program, evaluator, and this config, and hopefully it will start. And what you can see is it'll say, okay, I have these two models. This is the weight, and it'll just start running, right? Give it a second. I think my hotspot is also a bit slow. Now, as it is running, you can, if you want to see, there is a visualization script as well. So you can just call the visualizer with the output folder that you want to monitor, and it would actually create some nice looking stuff for you. So this is, I've run it, but it's on top of the same repository. So I'll let it run, but this is just the run which I did in the morning just to show you. So you can actually see the entire list of the programs that evolved. This is the final one which had, the highest score, but you could also monitor across islands. So this is the initial program, and if you look here, the prompts, let me just open it in a new window. So this is kind of how the input looks like, right? So we have some particular program, we give the code, which is this, right? And then we prompt the LLM. So literally saying that, okay, you are so-and-so, this is your task. So this prompt is coming from, I didn't spend time on it, but this is the main important part. So this system message that you put here in this is actually what is guiding the entire evolutionary trajectory, right? So this is coming literally from here. So your task is to improve whatever, right? Yeah, right. And then it will show what is the current state. So where we are, what is the fitness. We can show a number of top performing programs. This is also adjustable. I think by default it's 3. So it'll show up to 3 programs, the entire code. And then it'll ask at the end, like, hey, this is where we are. You have to use only diff format. Can you please tell me a better version of this program, right? And then the LLM will give something. It may, depending on what you're using, it may be chatty, it may describe things and so on. But all we do is we extract just the code from the LLM. So we just extract this diff, and then we put it in, and then we create the next individual in the population, right? So all of this are just individual programs, and now it started running. So it's showing the one that we had, right? Okay. So you can see how over time the best programs will come up, and this is I think this is the combined score, but you can see some of the other scores also that you put, right? And let me just go back to this and see how much further we have gone. Yeah. So as you're running, you can see that it will. So this was with 3 programs in parallel. So you can see the worker to island mapping. So it assigned each worker to each process to each island, and then it started sampling. And whenever you see there's a new best iteration, you will notice that the combined score is higher. So this was the current best, and then later you'll see there is this, so it becomes the new best, and so on and so forth. We also checkpoint everything, so you can go to the output folder, you can see the checkpoints. So we set it at 5, so at every 5 intervals you can see the evaluation of the best program, and also what was the actual program. So this shows you the metrics, and then the actual program which is generated, which is here, right? So initially, remember, we started with a completely random thing. So now if you notice, it is actually trying to do something. It's found it's automatically discovered it can do some sort of annealing, right? So instead of just having random, it's trying to figure out how to improve, right? So let me see what is the best, what does that look like? Yeah, so I think this is what discovered, which is at the end of the one. I think at the repository I have a better example. So for this particular example, if you run for like 100 odd iterations, it automatically discovers things like a use of temperature. So it figures out that we can actually do simulated annealing using a temperature parameter. And then the final program that comes out actually looks something like this, where all of these things are so this temperature and all of this is actually discovered by the LLM, right? So we didn't have this. We started with like this, and after 100 odd iterations, we reached this. Okay. So, right. Any questions? So you'll notice that it's taking a while, right, when it is running. So, and that's not all just the cost for the LLM. So we are using, I showed you, we are using Flash and Flashlight, which is quite fast. But it takes a while to do the evaluation, because during the evaluation, we run the program and then we collect some metrics, right? So in order to help with that, there is this notion of cascading evaluations, where you can define stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. And in some of the more complex examples, it's much more useful, but it is defined here just to give you an sense of, so you can have one stage evaluation where you only check for correctness, maybe you don't check for performance, right? And then you can have another stage where you do a much more detailed evaluation. And you can control the cascade using a config. So here, and that's why if you run it without this, you might see it will take a long time. So I set it at 1.3 because I ran it a few times and I noticed that if I do this, most of the programs where the score is less than 1.3 will only reach stage 1, and then they will not take as much to evaluate, right? So you can control the evaluation, and you can have like a list here. So you can have multiple stages of evaluation. So this particular idea of cascading evaluation is also from the AlphaEvolve paper. So they use this quite heavily in order to evolve, for instance, the kernels for Gemini on their TPU. So because if you're running a benchmark for a GPU, and it can take a long time. So at every iteration, if you're going to run it, yes, you may have huge resources, but if the code is wrong or there's something basic, you don't want to run it through the entire benchmark. So you can use this notion of cascading to avoid that, right? Okay, so this is actually about to finish. That's good. Another thing you'll notice is it will generate programs in the middle because this is an LLM, right? It will generate programs which will not execute, and it is fine because in this particular case, this error is not from us. It's actually some program that was generated, which when we try to execute it, so this is the actual program in the temporary folder, it has some error. It may have a syntax error, or it just uses some variable which doesn't exist and so on. It may happen, but in order to help this particular output, there is a way in OpenEvolve to take this output and feed it back to the next version of the iteration. And we call this artifacts. So if you look at the evaluator, we not only return just the values, we also return the errors which happened during the evaluation to help the next version of the, next iteration to fix these errors. Because if you use LLMs, you know, like if you type it once and it has an error, if you just copy paste it back, it will usually try and fix it, right? So you can use something similar. And the way we do it is we have this thing called artifacts. So along with our evaluation metrics, we return these error artifacts, and these are also included in the prompt. So the next time it runs, it can actually give the prompt back to the LLM, and it may fix it. It may end up fixing it, right? Okay, so it's finished, and I think this 723, and it's probably the same program. Let me see. No, it actually discovered something else. So there is obviously an inherent non-determinism. So every time you run, you may not get the exact same program, but in this case, it seems like it did find something different from what we had earlier, right? To prevent that, we do have a way to set seed, but you'll notice some of this is not in our control. So for example, you'll see there is this warnings here because Google's AI Studio endpoint, it doesn't allow setting up a seed. So I'm not able to use the same seed, and then that's why reproducibility might be limited. But if you're using your own LLM or a local model, you can do as much as you can to make sure that it's deterministic. Okay. So this is the only example I'll go through in this detail. Are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead. So island is just to maintain diversity. So everything will work if you just put one island also. Just like in the first example I showed with GA and the islands-based GA, right? So it's all the same. It just allows you to maintain diversity across population. So instead of having everything in one island where you discover things which might take longer to converge, you have 4, and each one will develop its own characteristics, right, as it's evolving. So the way we do cross-pollination is that every migration number of iterations, we will move some individuals from this island to another one. And when we move, we literally just take the code of the program and put it in the other island, right? How the code gets used is controlled by the top programs that we give. So the number, if we say 3 or 5, from that island, when it's creating the next prompt for the next the child, it will actually sample top programs, right? So it will sample 3 of the best. We also sample some inspiration. So programs which may not have good metrics, but for diversity. So we have all these things you can control. So number of top programs, number of diverse programs, and you can increase that value. So Island is just so you have a database of programs which are constantly evolving. Island helps you segregate them. And at each instance, from when you're doing the evolution on that particular island, you'll only look at individuals from that island. So when you do top, it will only be there. Now imagine it was all just one. Then every time only the same 3 or 4 will keep getting selected. And some of the diverse one, maybe they don't have as high a value, may get lost. So it helps mostly in convergence. So everything will work without that as well, but it might take much longer to converge. And this idea is not from OpenEvolve or AlphaEvolve, it's from like the actual evolutionary algorithms. Yeah. So one thing to note there is our approach is actually very shallow in terms of the tokens, right? So obviously if you run out, there is no other way, but if you look at the trajectory, the actual prompt that we send, it may be large, but it's not a multi-turn conversation. So towards the end, I'll talk about a benchmark called AlgoTune, where they use existing LLMs to improve numerical programs. And you look at their examples, you'll realize, for example, this one, you have a really long multi-turn conversation. So this is very deep, right? So you'll run out of tokens much more quickly in this kind of approach. So, and this is in some sense similar, but there's no evolution. It's like a single trajectory. So you give some program, then you ask the LLM to improve, then you give it the next metric, and it goes on and on. So in this particular case, you will run out of tokens much sooner compared to what we do. We are actually very shallow in terms of the number of tokens. So it's just like one turn. There's no second turn. So each time we call the LLM, we do maintain state and we give the best programs and so on, but we are actually very shallow in terms of the depth. Like for example, we have never run, at least in the experiments I have done, I have not run out of tokens. The other benefit is you can choose parts of the program code you want to evolve. So you don't need to send the entire thing. It's mostly just a diff. So, and you can selectively choose that. Okay, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I still don't really understand what you change between, so especially if you make your LLMs deterministic, if you set the same state.
Yeah. So island is just a way to tabulate all the stuff. There's nothing changing across islands. So for example, this particular example, we set 3 islands. So imagine, so it intersects with the parallel evolution a little bit, right? So inherently, it's actually very sequential because you are doing evolutionary thing. If you try to do all at once, the problem is that you will miss. So you started maybe doing 3 workers, right? And you found some best solution in one. Unless the other one will not know. So you will end up wasting a lot of resources unless you have a way to communicate, right? So what we do with islands and parallel evolution is we attach each worker to each island. So within the island, they evolve on their own and they sample only from that island. It's only to maintain diversity. So instead of having one population, we have 3 populations. So at every number of migration turns, we can actually swap certain things here and there, and that will increase the diversity, right? So there's no difference between the islands. It's exactly the same. It's a way of sampling. So the algorithm is exactly the same. It works with one island as well, like I said. It's just that it might take much longer. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
I think the downside is just keep on increasing the number of tokens.
If you use the?
Just keep on increasing the number of tokens.
It depends. It's a little empirical. I mean, you'll have to try it out. So the extreme case, if you use as many, if you want to do a lot more islands, perhaps there need to be some better way to do it. So instead of giving the same initial seed program to every island, like what we do in this, where we start the trajectory, you might want to consider giving 3 or 4 different seeds. Maybe the same algorithm slightly different, right? So it just depends. There's no hard and fast. You'll have to discover. It depends on the problem. Yeah. Any other? Yeah, go ahead.
How does the core of OpenEvolve actually work? Like when we run the evaluator, what happens to the evaluator?
So evaluator will just, so in OpenEvolve there is nothing. There's like just 4 or 5 files, okay? If you look the actual OpenEvolve implementation is just those 4 things which I showed you. The evaluator you have to write as a user for that particular problem, right? So this is all the OpenEvolve, right? So when, for example, in this case, when the program comes back from the LLM with the diff, we will apply the diff, and then it will create a new version of the initial program. And that one we will run with the evaluator that the user has provided. So the evaluator that gets run is the one that you have to write, which is here. So it will just call the evaluate method in this. And then this part we wrote based on the program or the task we are doing, right? And then you have to return the exact set of metrics. So it will expect only a single thing should always be present, combined score, which is what is used for fitness. But you can return other things, you can return error messages, whatever, right? You can control. So from an OpenEvolve or evolutionary perspective, we'll just look at this. What is the combined score? And it'll always compare the best or whatever that you saw with this score, right? Everything else has to happen for that particular problem because problems are very different and they may be validated in very different ways, right? So we have examples, this is programs, but we have applied it for prompt optimization. So you can use it like DSPY, right? You can use it to do that. You can just give the input as a prompt and the output is also evolved prompt, right? So in this case, how do you do evaluation? You actually take the prompt, you run the LLM on a data set, and then you see what is your accuracy, right? That's how you do evaluation in this case. So it depends on what you're doing. We have examples where we've done like different languages. So you don't need to do only Python, you can do Rust. right? But the code is written in Python, so how would you do this? So your evaluator then needs to take the Rust program and then run it and then get the results back to me so that I can use it in Python, right? So it depends on what you're doing, and then you can write the evaluator based on that. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So I'll just come to that's the next part. So we'll just get to it. Yeah, last one.
So I can ask, I have three questions.
Oh, go ahead.
First question is, this gentleman just said, so we need to write our own evaluation.
Yes.
And so, for example, I saw your repository have an example of attention.
Yes.
So we will optimize a GPU kernels.
Yes.
And GPU kernel is actually not only a numerical like correctness issue, they have also have performance concern.
Yes.
So if I want to use this to generate my own GPU kernel, I need to, for example, insert some further information to the evaluator, so they can take some like runtime duration,
Yes.
like
Yes.
cache duration.
So I will do that example very quickly. So maybe it'll help you a little bit. Yeah. But yes, the answer is yes.
I see.
And that's the reason why I did Apple instead of GPU, because it is so hard to get an actual cluster going with all the setup and so on. Yeah.
And, so my second question is, inside a single island, say you have a treasury, right? And as a human, when you manually tuning some code,
Mhm.
you need to check with the chatbot for several rounds. And
Yes.
sometimes you will find that for this round, the generation result is even worse than
Yes.
the previous two rounds.
Yes.
And I really want to go back to the previous two rounds and regenerate something.
Yes.
up. So in your trajectory, is that possible?
So our trajectory it may not happen that way, but the similar thing can happen because at every instance we sample some diverse inspiration programs as well. So to take your point, that thing that doesn't work really well, it will still be added to the database. And that's the reason why we need to have like diverse islands with not just 1, 10 or like 100 population. So that one that did not work well, failed, but had some particular idea which can be combined with something else, right? The way it will get incorporated, it has to come through either the top program or diverse program or inspirations. So we'll sample it and then we'll include it in the next iteration. We'll give the prompt and then we'll include some of those. And then the LLM can combine them. So not directly. That approach is more like this AlgoTune, which I said, which is like you just chat with the LLM one by one, and then you just keep going down the loop, right? But it will come, and at least if you look at the results that we have, it's actually much more efficient to do it this way, and given the last one.
No, I see.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind. So I think many of the things will get clear as we go through this. So so somebody asked like, did you replicate or whatever? The actual results, right? So yes, so even before we open sourced it, one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that we can replicate at least some results from the AlphaEvolve paper. And the one that we chose was this. So this problem is it's like I think it was like an artificial problem, but there's a unit square, and this problem can be defined for value of n, right? So the one is n is equal to 26. What it means is that you have a unit square, and you want to place 26 circles inside it in such a way that they don't touch each other, but this combined sum of radii is highest, right? So that's the idea. So you want to pack n non-overlapping circles inside a unit square to optimize a particular metric. And in this case is the sum of all circles radii, right? Now AlphaEvolve, they use this quite, the claim in the paper is like it discovered something which is like, even people have tried this for a number of, so long and so on, and they found a result which is beyond what was done before, right? So we start to match with the assumption to try to see if we can match this, and we were able to using actually the same model. So because it's Google, in the paper they used 2.0 Pro and 2.0 Flash, right? And we use the same model to be able to replicate this result. So our initial program actually looks just like this. So maybe you come in and then you look at this unit square, and then you want to just place some circles in, and you manually decide how to do, right? So I say, okay, never mind, I'll put everything in the corner, I'll put here, and I'll just leave it. So this is the actual initial program. And it's not doing anything, it's just doing the construction, right? So with this program, and then the prompt just to prompt the system to just pack it as tightly as possible. And after 10 generations, we discovered something which humans also talk about, which is this hexagonal arrangement. So it's actually much more efficient if you put the first ring of circles in something that looks like sort of an hexagon, right? So, and the system is able to discover that on its own. Then after 200 iterations, it figured out something which looks vaguely like this, where you see that it starts to pack things very, very tightly, right? And when the first time when I did it, it took I think around 800 odd iterations, but eventually it did figure out how to use SciPy's optimize with SQP method to actually create the bounds and then push the circles slowly touching around to create this kind of a packing, which is actually exactly the same one which you can see from the AlphaEvolve paper. So AlphaEvolve, they didn't release code, but for the results they had, they released the code to check, to evaluate whether it's correct or not, and also to generate these figures for each of them, right? So we were able to find and discover the exact same packing for circle packing based on OpenEvolve, right? And then subsequently, actually, somebody has suppressed it. So just last week, it's the PhD student in US, and he was able to go beyond what was this while he was trying to reproduce. So he bested this number, and his construction looks very, very different. I think he used different models or whatever, but this is the program that actually creates that construction. So there's a lot more of hand-holding in terms of, so this has evolved over several stages, right? So something I didn't mention is, which we discovered while doing this, is you can evolve for a certain time from an initial program, and then you have a best program. Then you can run another session of OpenEvolve, right, from the best program, and then change the configuration, the island or whatever, depending on what you did, right? So even in the original, when I did it, I actually did it in 2 stages. So the first stage for circle packing, because I started with something very basic, just putting pieces around, right? So you'll see there are 2 configs. So first config ran for like, I think, 100, 200 iterations. And then after that, we took the best program of the previous config, and then we ran for another 200, 300 iterations, right? So the example that this person has shown is probably involved several phases, because you can see some of the things are just constructions. They're not, they're constructed directly. They're not code, right? Okay. Yeah. So this was the first thing that we checked, and then we saw like, okay, yes, this is useful. The next thing we wanted to do was to take one of the examples. This is also from the AlphaEvolve paper. They used it for Gemini, and they used it on TPUs to evolve more efficient kernels, right? Now we wanted to see how we could do something similar, but we set up our stuff on a very small model, Qwen 3, 600 million. The interesting thing about this model is it has group query attention with a 40-80 head ratio. And instead of using GPU, we decided to do it on Apple for 2 reasons. One, there's not enough work being done on MLX and so on, other than Apple. And then there is a slightly different, in terms of inference, you have like the full entire RAM, which is available as VRAM, right? So there are things you could do which may not be done. So GPU is a very common target, and everybody writes, custom kernels are handwritten for programs and so on. And there are libraries like Unsloth, which I don't know if you've heard, allows you to do fine tuning with really small memory and on GPUs, right? So it would be very hard to actually beat all those, because those are people, when a new model comes in, they take the backward pass and then they handwrite it by like customize only for that particular model. So we decided to just take something else with an MLX, which is still very hard. So MLX's scale dot product attention is very, very efficient. It's written in C++, and it's extremely hard to do, optimize over that. And initially, I tried for a long time. Obviously, I couldn't do it for the general case. That's why I decided to focus on just one particular model with only a very specific group query attention, right? And this, so there were a lot of challenges like what you mentioned. So very, very careful around evaluation for these things, because you want to make sure that what results you get for every iteration has some statistical significance, right? So if you just run for 10 things on a small benchmark, you will not get it'll just be random fluctuations, right? So we run for very big, like a performance benchmark, like he mentioned. And if you do that, every generation, it will take a long time for you to run. And so the only way to do it is like do it in a distributed way. But what we saw, at least in this particular case, was that when we did this for Qwen 3, it discovered at least 3, not all of them are new, but like known, but unknown in the Apple MLX world optimization. So first it discovered around 10 generation, the SIMD optimization, then 2-pass softmax algorithm, and then some layout for the memory, right? So, so this was kind of our benchmark, and we saw improvements, but we also saw some regression in some cases in terms of code gen and short context cases for the kernel that was evolved, right? I'll just show you what the example. So this example is there. It's fairly. You could try and run it. It's if you have a Mac, you should be able to run it. Yeah. So it does discover things like these. So for example, like the original implementation had like a scalar, then it's able to evolve into vector operations with optimal width for your machine. And then, so this, converting from this pass one to using softmax. So this is a known trick, so it's not like a new algorithm as such, but at least in the initial implementation, this was not done this way. So it's able to do this fused accumulation. And finally, this is just it's very specific to Quen. So 48 heads, so it divides into a direct 5:1 mapping. So so this is also discovered memory access. So the funny thing is, obviously, I know nothing about metal, and obviously the only way to do this was to use a LLM to do it, right? So metal is like it's the actual code is. I mean, even the initial code I had to generate from. So this is kind of the code which is embedded in, right? So it looks like this, right? And then we give this, and then we have a bunch of. We have a harness, and then we have an evaluator to compare, right? Okay. So that was the second major thing we tried to see how we could replicate, and then at least for that specific model, we were able to get better results, right? Now the final one is this, which some of you asked like about. So this benchmark also came very recently called AlgoTune. So all of these tasks in this benchmarks are numerical tasks, and I think I showed you a little bit of what they look like. So you have a site here, you can see. So these are the kind of tasks that are there in these benchmark. Maybe let me just show you convex hell. Right. So, and the good thing about this is all of them have like a reference implementation. So there's no correctness issue as such. So all of them are like have an implementation which is implemented. So this is only for performance optimization, right? So, and the way they did in their system. So you look here. This is the final version that generated. Used actually Number. I mean, it used a much better library. I think it implemented it by hand, if I'm not wrong, instead of using some existing method or call, right? So this benchmark was good, and if you look the overall performance of all the models and so on, you will notice it's somewhere. Where is it? Yeah. So this is how kind of the current set of models perform on it, and you'll notice the O4 Mini. You'll notice GPT-5. So this they added recently. So this is from the baseline. So on average across all the benchmarks, using this model they're able to improve the performance by 1.72, right? So that's the idea. And I showed you one of this trajectory. So it's very different. So this is the kind of trajectory what you would do if you were to do it manually, like some was saying, right? If I just keep chatting and ask. So maybe I'll show you. So it looks like a conversation. So this is how it starts. You start with something. You tell the model, then you get the response. You still have to evaluate to tell the model like how difficult or how easy, how successful the code was. So it says like, okay, everything is valid. I got this much speed up. Now can you tell me how to improve more? And then you keep going for a really long, like hundreds of turns or whatever, until you run out of context or money, or in this case, because they chose every instance for $1 or something, right? So this is very different from how our AlphaEvolve or OpenEvolve works. So we try to see if we could do better, either with like much simpler models or with others. So we didn't run it around. We took a subset of problems, and then we tried to apply a number of models, and we saw some really good results. So these are the same harmonic mean, the number that you see. So on the things that we tried, we saw Gemini Flash with 200 iterations on OpenEvolve. It already suppressed the best model when you do a straight line sequential kind of trajectory, right? We also tested with some open weight models, including Gemma 3 and Quen 3 coder, and then we saw like some good results with those as well, right? Now you saw the config, there were like hundreds of different parameters, right? So we used this to also do some evaluations around how or what kinds of parameters or what works well with OpenEvolve in terms of setting temperature, in terms of how many iterations you can run, different kinds of models, and also I showed you that we always generate diffs, right? But for some of the models which are not good at following instructions, especially if you use open weight models which are not that big, you'll notice it doesn't generate a proper diff every time, right? So we also did some tests to see whether having the model generate the full code versus just the patch, which one is better, right? Okay, now this is the point about the ensemble I was telling. So I showed you an ensemble where the ensembling is very simple. We just use it to speed it up, 2080. But there are other ways in which we could combine, right? We could take some really good big models. So we have like here Gemini Flash 2.0, we have Quen 3 coder, and they are good at different things, right? In terms of the task performance. So this is green and this is blue. So as you see here, green is down, blue is up. So can we actually combine them to get better? So at least our results, it's more of a negative result. So when we tried it, we didn't see the benefit in this kind of evolutionary system. Partially because if you do half and half and then you don't control really well, what tends to happen is that one model actually keeps removing the changes made by the other, and you see this kind of an oscillating pattern with the ensemble versus like a straight line evolution, right? So initially maybe there are some things which are suggested by one model, which are undone by the other, and so on and so forth. So for ensembling, what we've seen is that using models from the same family works better. So if you see all the examples, they're all like Flash with Pro, or Flashlight with Flash, or Llama 3 with 4, and so on, because otherwise there's far too much difference, and then you see that there is very little model agreement for all the tasks. It's like a completely checkered pattern, right? Okay, so based on the experience of almost 10, 20 different diverse examples, there are some things to watch out for, which we've noticed, which is and often you have to decide at what level of abstraction you have to apply the search on, right? So, and that affects a lot of the choices. So for example, the matrix multiplication, which was another problem that AlphaEvolve described that they were able to do better for a particular case, and they created those tensor constructions. If you try to give it like a 3 for loop matrix multiplication and say evolve, it's just going to replace it with like numpy's dot product, right? Because it's going to be very hard for you to measure the difference between that and whatever else it comes up with, right? So you have to figure out at what level of abstraction you want to apply the problem. So circle packing example, I started with like literally saying put the circle here, 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 here. That is an construction, right? I'm just giving it artificially, say this is the construction. So very initial iterations were just the LLM putting the circles directly and not an actual program which can discover, right? So you have to decide which level of abstraction you want to apply it on, and that can have a lot of impact. Then you need to know when to use allow the models to use the existing libraries or to prevent them. So for example, the MLX kernel, I mean, if you're not careful, you'll just replace it with scalar dot product and then you will not know. So you want to prevent it if you really want to get something better. You can compare it with an existing API, but if you're trying to improve upon it and if you allow all things, it will just change. Sometimes you wanted to give a particular API which it may not know about. So the same AlgoTune example, some of them, if you use JAX, it speeds up compared to NumPy. So if you don't give it in the prompt, it's very hard that the model will on its own discover. So you have to figure out how to prevent and allow these. If you notice, there is a huge difference between this and the way we are prompting it. We actually have only just one specific prompt for each problem. So we evolve hundreds and thousands of programs, but they're all guided by that one single system prompt, right? So that can after a while get very tricky. So for example, you'll notice that for certain cases for metal, when we were doing it, LLMs cannot generate good GPU metal or Triton code. Even if you try by hand, it will generate code, but it will have some errors. So the way to do better would be like you give it some documentation or some other things from outside. So you have to figure out how to do that. The only thing you have is just a single big prompt. Like you cannot intervene in the middle, right? So somehow the big system prompt is guiding instead of one program, like a whole population of programs. So that's the part. You need to build robust cascading evals, which I think I covered a little bit because requires. And finally, it applies to only a certain kinds of problems. So it's not like a general purpose coding agent. You cannot use it. It's not meant to be used for everything. So you need to figure out whether the problem you have, you can formulate like a EA and then see if you can apply it, right? Now, in terms of what does it mean? What's this thing and why this is evolutionary and like what does it, like how is it different from existing stuff, right? So there's at least in the last 1 year, there's a lot of focus on inference time scaling or test time scaling of LLMs, where you do a lot more compute at inference or at runtime when you're doing the inference rather than at training, right? So an example of that would be there are typically two ways. One is you go depth or you go parallel, right? So depth would be now these models which can do these reasoning. So you can set the token budget, okay, low, medium, high, or use so many tokens for thinking. So at that time, what is happening is it's taking a lot of time and it's going much more deeper. It's generating a lot more content and then it's giving you slightly better results or whatever. There's also parallel. So you could do like a MCST, a tree search or mixture of agents or simple majority voting where you just, instead of taking one response from an LLM, you take like n responses and you combine them in some way, right? So this particular approach or this evolutionary approach actually presents some axes very similar to those, but it's different from either sequential or parallel. So we are not going in depth and we are also not doing just parallel and combining. We are combining all of this guided by a EA. So we maintain not 1, 2, 10, 20, but like you could maintain thousands of population of programs at any instance, and then you control how they pass information with each other using this evolutionary algorithm on top, right? So this actually does represent, and that's why it's very exciting, like a distinct axis in terms of inference time scaling, right? Now, one of the things which is still like unknown or what could be is, can you actually distill some of these evolutionary trajectories? And there is some relationship between the work we do here with RL as well. So at every instance, you see we actually create a metric and then if you take the trajectory of the evolutionary trajectory of how it reached the best program, you could actually do RL on those trajectories, right? So the question is like how we can distill this evolutionary agents to maybe the next version of the LLM, or to actually fine tune an LLM with RL potentially, so that all of this that we're doing, it's very expensive at runtime. If we could do some of that during training, or we could actually make the model instead of figuring out figure it out in this evolutionary way, that could actually help, right? So that's pretty much it. I think I'm close to my time as well. Happy to take more questions. There is some more.
2 questions?
Yeah, sure. 2 questions, and then there's some more stuff here, so you can look it up. I'll share the slides if you want to see the details about the experiments. Yeah.
So the Google's paper was only sharing the results and how they did it. So can you share a bit about the journey of how you came up with this?
So it's just a bunch of experimentation. Like I said, the idea is actually very simple. It is nothing new in terms of, there's no new EA or it uses existing evolutionary algorithms, right? Most of the time spent in doing the experiment and then figuring out what needs to change and adjusting the things, or figuring out with these configurations, right? Many of the things are left unsaid in the paper. So like these islands versus parallel evaluator, how do you sample? What we implemented probably is not necessarily what they might have implemented, right? They might have done something totally different, we don't know. But based on whatever we could say, and there's actually a big community and even a big Discord, I'm not running it, behind OpenEvolve, and there's 800, 900 people. So these things that people have actually discovered as they experimented with it. So yeah, my only thing there is it's just based on completely just experimenting it, yeah, and seeing what works. Okay, I think one more. No? All right, thank you guys. I will be available later if you want to chat as well. So thank you so much.